In 1963, the film The Great Escape brought to life a daring and ingenious plan to liberate more than 200 men from Stalag Luft 3.
It's impossible to make a place escape-proof, believe me, especially if you got anybody with any brains. And if you've got 2,000 guys with brains all thinking the same thing, there's no way they can keep you in.
One of the real-life prisoners was Australian pilot Paul Brickhill, who had been shot down by the Germans in Tunisia in 1943 and brought to Germany, where he was held in Stalag Luft 3 until 1945. While in captivity, Brickhill was involved in the construction of 3 tunnels, including the 350-foot underground passage through which 76 men escaped in March 1944.
Paul Brickhill was sort of the official historian of the escape organization. He was allowed access to all of the workshops, everything that was going on, because I think the escape leaders realized that this was a big operation and that they wanted the story to be told at some point.
In 1950, Brickhill published a memoir of his wartime experiences, which immediately caught the attention of Hollywood director John Sturges, who had produced documentaries for the Army Air Corps during World War II. After the war, Sturges earned a reputation for directing ensemble casts in predominantly male stories, such as Bad Day at Black Rock. Sturges wanted to turn Brickhill's book, The Great Escape, into a film.
John thought it would make a great motion picture. He was convinced that it was about, really about nobility and honor.
Brickhill turned down many film offers for his book because he didn't want to exploit the story. But Sturges continued to pursue Brickhill.
John was a true bulldog. He never gave up on anything, and he continued to hound and persuade, and I think he said all the right things because he was a scholar of that subject matter.
Once he finally gained Brickhill's approval, Sturges still faced the difficult task of persuading a film studio to take on the project. During the 1950s, John Sturges was under contract to MGM and had pitched the idea to Louis B. Mayer. Mayer rejected the story as too complicated and too expensive. But in 1960, the director scored a huge success with The Magnificent Seven. He now had the leverage he needed to convince the Mirisch Company and United Artists to produce the film. The real escape operation had involved hundreds of men. Sturges wanted to distill their stories into fewer characters, but still remain true to the story.
I think there's always a concern to make a picture as accurate as you can, and then have some creative license to adjust to make it entertainment. And I think we held to this very closely. Maybe in some cases, characters were altered a little bit.
In 1962, Steve McQueen, James Garner, James Coburn, and Charles Bronson were among the first actors signed to the movie, all portraying characters based on a combination of real people.
Most of those characters, for example, James Garner as the Scrounger, those roles were performed by a very large number of people.
But while most characters were composites of real people, one role did stand out, that of Roger Bartlett. Bartlett was based on Roger Bushell, a 33-year-old South African pilot who had played a unique role in devising the master escape plan.
Roger Bushell was a very impressive person. He was a hard man and a very just man, and a great admiration for him.
Determined to fill this key role authentically, the director chose British actor Richard Attenborough. As the rest of the cast came together, the script was completed by W.R. Burnett, an American screenwriter best known for writing gritty novels like The Asphalt Jungle. Sturges then brought on Australian-born writer James Clavell in the hope that he would ensure that the British characters were realistically created. The next step was to find a suitable location where the filmmakers could reconstruct the infamous prison camp.
The image of that Stalag was, besides the wire and the fences, there was this enormous forest. How would you get through that if you did get out? So I found 6 very crummy, scrawny pine trees, 6, between Idlewild and Palm Springs. And I said, John, I found the Black Forest. Just come and look at this. And he was fighting laughter and everything else as we looked at these terrible 6 trees. He said, no, this'll be fine. So the plan was we would build the camp around these 6 trees and call it the Black Forest.
A problem developed when the Screen Extras Guild prohibited the production from using local people as extras. Faced with the expense of bringing hundreds of extras more than 100 miles from Los Angeles every day, Assistant Director Bob Relia was dispatched to Europe to look for alternative locations.
I called John and said, I got some bad news for you. Guess what Germany looks like? It looks like Germany. It's criminal if we don't make the whole thing right here. It's crazy. It looks like Germany. And then we both swallowed hard and decided to go there.
The production was to be based at the Bavaria Studios outside Munich. Since the studios were surrounded by pine trees, the camp could be recreated right beside the sound stages. Conscious of Brickhill's concerns about accuracy, Sturges wanted his help on the design and layout of the camp.
He phoned Australia and asked Paul Brickhill to come, and Paul said, no, I've been sick, I can't possibly. He said, have you any suggestions? He said, yes, I can tell you exactly who to take. Go to Canada and get Wally Floody. He built the thing. He'll know more about it than anybody else.
During captivity in Stalag Luft 3, Canadian airman Wally Floody had been responsible for the overall design and plan of the 3 escape tunnels. After the war, he had returned to his native country.
Floody had become an insurance executive in Canada. We made a deal with him to come over and spend 2 months with us, a month of preparation and the first month of shooting.
Wally sent for his logbook, and up behind Sturges on his desk, he had all the little authentic pictures of what Stalag Luft 3 that had come out of Wally's thing. Oh, yes, he wanted it to be authentic very much.
With Wally Floody on board as technical advisor, the filmmakers set about building the notorious prison camp. The real Stalag Luft 3 had caged 10,000 Allied airmen in 6 compounds. For the film, the producers built 1 compound and hired American students from the nearby university as extras.
The towers and the wires and structure and the huts and all that, it was exactly as it was. And the guards and the setup, that really struck me as being remarkable. They did a wonderful job on that.
In June 1962, the international cast and crew assembled in Bavaria, and cameras rolled on the recreation of one of the most famous escapes in military history. But the now legendary escape provided a unique challenge. The filmmakers had to make the audacious events they were depicting seem real to a film-going audience nearly 20 years after the true story had taken place. During World War II, Allied airmen who were captured by the Germans were transported to one of several special prison camps for holding Air Force officers, far from the English Channel. Although the Geneva Convention protected prisoners of war from physical harm, the German forces wanted to make sure they couldn't rejoin the war effort.
Wasn't a damn thing you could do about it. As the Germans said to me when they took me into the farmhouse, for you, the war is over.
The camps that housed Air Force officers were run by the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe.
I guess you could call them the least Nazified of the German services. So there was a sense of camaraderie, you might say, or rapport for the flying officers.
But many of the Allied officers felt it was their duty to try to escape, and even if they didn't succeed, their efforts would tie up vital German manpower. The film quickly established this as the prisoner's strategy.
We figured we were keeping quite a few Germans occupied, trying to keep us in. And we had a lot of minor escapes.
The object of the exercise wasn't really to get people home, because that very rarely happened. The object was to create disruption in occupied Europe and in Germany.
In April 1942, tired of the continual escape attempts that drained their resources, the Luftwaffe decided to move all the notorious escapers to one prison. The Luftwaffe expanded a small camp at Sagan, 100 miles southeast of Berlin, where they planned to operate an escape-proof compound. Captured airmen of all nationalities were brought together in the camp named Stalag Luft 3.
Well, they had taken everything they'd learned from 2.5 years of guarding prisoners of war and put it into that camp.
There was double barbed wire, fences 9 feet high, and coiled barbed wire in between. It was a very intimidating place, I must say. And they had lots of guards. There was guards in the towers. There was guards on the ground walking around the perimeter.
Despite the high security, as soon as the airmen were moved into the new compound, they tried to escape. Their early attempts were random but persistent, as the screen version of the story chronicled.
So you had people crawling under trucks, jumping into trucks, trying to get out with parties of workmen. Exactly like it happened in the film.
But as the film also showed, the arrival of one man changed everything. Under the leadership of Roger Bushell, various escape activities became organized into one overall plan.
Bushell was a South African by birth who had come to England. He was extremely intelligent, very determined, immensely capable. He had great leadership skills. And very early in the war, although he wasn't the highest-ranking prisoner, he quickly emerged as the leader in terms of escaping.
Bushell's plan was to dig 3 tunnels at once. He reasoned that if one was found, they would still have 2 other chances of escape. But as the film accurately portrayed, the Luftwaffe had prepared the site for the compound very carefully in order to make life as difficult as possible for would-be escapees.
They had buried microphones around the perimeter wire so they could listen for the sounds of tunneling. They built the huts on stilts so that guards could get underneath and look for signs of tunneling.
The prisoners started 3 tunnels in separate huts. They nicknamed the tunnels Tom, Dick, and Harry, and each one had a unique trap door for access.
I think Dick's trap was the most ingenious, not only in this camp, but probably in any camp. It was constructed in the drain in the shower block, just like it shows in the film. The prisoners decided that they could bail out the water from the drain, sink their shaft through the side of the drain, and then seal it up again, fill it with water, and the Germans would never discover it was there. And in fact, they never did. It was the only tunnel that remained undiscovered through the whole war.
Each tunnel began with a shaft that was 30 feet deep. From this depth, the German guards wouldn't be able to hear the work that was going on right under their feet. Fortunately, the light soil was easy to excavate.
Well, it was mostly sand, damp sand, so you could use your hands. So we didn't have to use many implements at all.
But every 3.5 feet of tunnel produced nearly a ton of sand that had to be disposed of. On screen, the ingenious method of dispersal was authentically dramatized.
I would go to the garden and I would pull the 2 strings in my pant pockets to release the sand. It would all dribble down there and pretty well below the surface. So that was one way of disposing of a great deal of sand, because there was an awful lot of people involved in getting rid of the sand.
But once the actual tunnels were under construction, the soft, sandy earth created another problem. The underground passageways were prone to cave-ins.
Sand has no support. You dig out and it's just a matter of time till it'll collapse. Wally was digging and I was passing back, and suddenly the candle blew out and there was a hell of a wind in my face, so I knew damn well what it was. So I just went forward as fast as I could, and I got him out in about, well, I guess, minutes.
As the tunnels crept towards the perimeter of the compound, the prisoners used wooden bed slats to shore up the walls and built a railway to speed them through the dimly lit passage.
I thought the film did a wonderful job of giving viewers a real picture of what it looked like inside the tunnel. You would have a space that was probably 2.5 foot wide by 2 foot 8 inches high. It would be shored with lumber all the way along. There would be a little, essentially a trolley that would lie in your stomach to go back and forth.
The prisoners even invented an air supply system to improve conditions underground, which was faithfully reconstructed in the film with the help of technical advisor Wally Flutty.
The art department would take Wally and put him in the tunnel set, and he would literally say, you know, it's not tight enough, because I remember my shoulders, I haven't gained that much weight, my shoulders were scraping, so they'd take him out and take him back the next day after they adjusted it.
With Flutty's reassurance, Sturges and his team were confident that they were realistically recreating the events of the daring escape.
Wally said, you know, you guys are getting it right, the wire and the construction and the actors. He said, I know you're getting it right. And I said, are you sure? And he said, yeah, because I'm having nightmares.
But as in real life, building the escape tunnel was only half of the story. And the Great Escape would soon come under fire for embellishing the role played by Americans in the breakout.
The general public would not know about the Americans not being in the escape. They could walk away from the movie with quite a wrong impression.
In preparation for their flight to freedom, the prisoners of war in Stalag Luft III had to replace their officers' uniforms with clothes that would not reveal their true identity. As the film showed, the men were resourceful in using what few materials they had to create many different costumes.
We had guys who were tailors in the camp, and they were very good at it. For instance, some of the guys came in uniform, but the uniform they came in with, if you took a razor blade and sheared it very carefully, it would be the same color as a German uniform. And also, they paraded themselves in uniform so we could copy them. So that was how we did it. And they were pretty good looking, too.
The escapees would also need official documents and travel passes to allow them to pass through Germany to a neutral country such as Sweden or Switzerland. The prisoners' ingenuity in obtaining original papers to copy was also well documented in the film.
The method of bribery that was portrayed in the movie was absolutely right on the mark. The whole point was that the Americans had the benefit of Red Cross parcels and parcels from home that contained goods that the Germans didn't have access to, especially things like cigarettes and chocolate and coffee.
They'd say, well, come and have a cup of coffee. Well, the Germans loved having real coffee, or a cigarette, or a piece of chocolate, or a bar of soap, you know. And then the demand, eventually a request would come, I wonder if you could bring us a copy of an Urlaubschein, the leave ticket that the Germans had to have if they went anywhere.
The escape organization included a team of men who meticulously crafted fake documents by hand.
Each of us had our specialities. My specialty was German script, the Gothic script, which sounds frightfully difficult, but is awfully easy to forge.
They could copy any piece of paper you ever wanted to show them, and they were wonderful. We had Ausweises that were better than the Germans. I mean, it was terrific, and signed by Hitler and signed by whoever.
But many of the materials that were needed to manufacture documents, compasses, maps, and money were not available in the prison camp. The filmmakers made these resources seem easy to obtain and chose not to explain just how they were supplied. In fact, many items found their way into Stalag Luft III, hidden inside parcels that were sent to the prisoners.
We had parcels from home. They called them personal parcels. But in there, sometimes you would find materials that were useful for escape.
Packages containing secret escape material were sent separately from the Red Cross and YMCA supplies in order not to compromise the work of the official organizations.
The role of the Red Cross and the YMCA was sacrosanct, and this should not be confused with the activities of both Washington and London to create many avenues for sending this material into the POWs, both through the families and through agencies.
The agencies responsible for these covert operations were MI9 in Britain and Ms. X in the United States. Military intelligence ran these undercover groups to assist the prisoners of war in their efforts to escape. But the systems used to aid the escapees were timeless. And even after the war, those involved felt that the information should remain classified.
When I did my original research, the prisoners pleaded with me not to reveal some of those techniques because they felt they were clever, but they were also basic and could be used in future wars. And so we honored that at that time.
By avoiding any mention of this confidential information, the plea for discretion on the part of the survivors was also respected by the filmmakers.
They were very sensitive to what was going on in Vietnam and elsewhere in the world and the plight of POWs, and I think there was just a general appreciation.
While support activities continued in the entire camp, the diggers kept working underground. On screen, the discovery of the tunnel called Tom led the team to concentrate on one of the remaining two in an effort to break out as soon as possible. But in real life, it was news that the Germans planned to separate the American airmen from the British and Canadians that prompted the tunnelers to focus their efforts on just one tunnel.
They knew that the American prisoners were scheduled to leave the camp sometime in the fall of 1943. And they were very keen to break the tunnel before the Americans left so that they could have a chance to escape as well.
Unfortunately, the American officers were transferred to a new compound before the tunnel was completed. But the film's producers wanted to appeal to the widest audience possible. They also needed to showcase their cast of mostly American stars.
We felt at the time, United Artists felt, and so did the Mirishes, and John agreed, that to go very accurate and have it all British, Australian, or Commonwealth people, that you would lose the potential market as compared to what you would have of making it an American or international, if you will, by throwing in a Steve McQueen, a Jim Garner.
When the actual breakout took place in March 1944, no Americans escaped from the underground passage, although the film showed them playing a major role in the flight to freedom. The real prisoners understood the producer's decision and acknowledged the American airmen's enormous contribution to the overall escape effort.
After all, it was a movie, and the Americans did help a great deal.
Despite its overall attention to accuracy, The Great Escape had made compromises in both plot and characterization. But it was in the scenes which showed the escaped prisoners making their way to freedom that the producers faced their greatest challenge and their harshest criticism. The movie, The Great Escape, showed how on the night of March 24th, 1944, the tunnel built by Allied prisoners of war in Stalag Luft 3 finally surfaced outside the perimeter fence. Although escape organizer Roger Bushell had hoped to lead 200 men to freedom, tunnel collapses and an unexpected air raid allowed fewer than half that number to get out before they were spotted by the German guards. This was vividly dramatized on screen.
79 actually got through the tunnel and out the other end. 3 of them were captured right at the tunnel mouth, and the other 76 got away and began their break.
The film charted the progress made by groups of prisoners, whether by catching the train, stealing a rowboat, or taking a bicycle. But the most spectacular getaway in the film was made by Hiltz, played by Steve McQueen.
The motorcycle sequence in The Great Escape was born out of a couple of things. One of them was Steve was very good on a motorcycle, so that's the solution to the problem. But what is the problem? Well, the problem is, what's he going to do in the chases? Because Lord knows we didn't have a scripted chase. We had nothing when we went out the morning with how do we get started with somebody chasing him? Well, a guy comes up and says, show me your papers, and he kicks him and takes off. That we just were winging it right there.
In fact, McQueen had only accepted the role on the condition that he could show off his motorcycle skills.
There was a good touch of Hollywood in it, of course. I mean, the Steve McQueen part and the motorbike, well, that was, strictly fiction.
The improvised scene culminated in Hilt's daring attempt to leap across the barbed wire barrier that stood between him and freedom in Switzerland.
No one was that adventurous. I thought that was a wonderful action scene. It has no reference to historical reality, but boy, it's a great scene. It's a great moment in the film.
In real life, most of the 76 Allied airmen were recaptured within days of their escape. But instead of being returned to Stalag Luft 3, they were held by the Gestapo while the German High Command decided their fate.
Hitler wanted all of them shot, out of hand. He wanted the entire lot of them executed immediately. He was apparently dissuaded by Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, who said killing all of them would do irreparable harm to our relations with the neutral nations. Someone then suggested, well, perhaps we should shoot half of them. And then they decided on 50, essentially as an arbitrary number.
On screen, the killings were depicted as the mass murder of an entire group. The recaptured men, including Bartlett, were driven into the countryside where they were shot. Although the executions actually took place over several days, the film accurately portrayed the method.
They were taken out in ones and twos, small groups. The largest group, I think, was 10, typically to a field where they were allowed out to relieve themselves, and then shot in the back.
When the news reached the prison camp, those left behind were shocked to hear of the deaths of their comrades. It was obvious that the Gestapo had flagrantly broken the rules of the Geneva Convention.
Our officer asked, well, how many were wounded? And, well, of course, he was told none were wounded, and it was quite evident that they'd been murdered.
We were all called to roll call, and we were informed that 50 of them had been shot. Of the 76 that escaped, 50 of them had been killed by the Gestapo.
Everybody came away from that with a feeling of despair, and particularly in my case, because there were 4 of my very close friends were on that list.
I never spoke to a German again. We could cut them off completely. And they knew it. They knew they'd done something wrong.
Of the hundreds who had contributed to the escape operations in March 1944, only 3 men made it to freedom, just as the film showed. Dutchman Bob van der Stock traveled through Europe to Spain, while Norwegians Peter Bergsland and Jans Muir escaped on a ship from Stettin. But the murder of Roger Bushell and 49 of his fellow escapees cast a long shadow over the story. It posed a problem for the filmmakers, who needed to create a more upbeat ending to the picture.
A little bit of commerciality has to come into this, so I think that's extremely clear in the movie, that Bartlett and his fellows got it done. They died for it, but the tag on the end of the picture is that McQueen's character had survived, which made you feel pretty good because he wasn't with the main group.
When you see Steve McQueen back in the cooler bouncing his ball, it's like, oh, here's another day. It was never another day again. They were under a cloud thereafter that nobody could shake.
It's still not a feel-good picture. It never would be. Because you've got to do the execution at the end, or you're not only not being true to it, but I think you lose all the drama.
Only time would tell if the filmmakers had successfully balanced truth with drama, and in so doing, gained the respect of the men and women who fought and died in the war.
Just before he died in 1992, director John Sturges spoke about his 1963 film, The Great Escape. He talked about the inspiration for the character of Virgil Hilts, played by Steve McQueen. Sturges said one of the characters in the actual story that we based Steve's part on was a man called Jones. We wanted to be able to substantiate the fact that there was an American in this thing who had the kind of go-to-hell atmosphere around him that they all had. Jones certainly had that, and he had a pretty good career after the war, too. This is the story of the real Virgil Hilts. This is the story of a man called Jones.
I was born in Coos Bay, Oregon, I hate to say it, it was the 18th of December, 1913. 1936, I was commissioned in the Cavalry Reserve, and I went on active duty at Fort Bliss, Texas. Spent a marvelous year there. One day I ran across a good friend. "Where are you going, Norm?" He said, "Well, I'm going to the hospital and take a flight physical. I'm going to go be an aviator." And that sounded really interesting, so I said, "I'll go with you." I got a wire back in the middle of June, enlist Jones as a flying cadet. Off I went to Randolph Field and then entered the class of 38B. That was the first time I ever flew. And incidentally, I got sick. And I didn't eat breakfast for 8 months. We entered with about 165 cadets and graduated 78 a year later. The Air Force was already starting to build up a little bit. The whole of 1941, we were literally on maneuvers, working our fanny off. On the 1st of December, we headed for the West Coast, and we were to start maneuvers against the Navy in the San Diego area. Lo and behold, on the morning of 7th of December, the world knows what happened. Everybody rushed around then, and it really shocked you. It was more, boy, let's get at it. Roosevelt said, "We have got to do something. We got to make a move." Lieutenant Major Doolittle was supposed to organize it and set up the mission to send a task force as close as we could to bomb Tokyo and proceed to an airfield in China. And he looked far and wide throughout the Air Force to find the most skillful, bravest, honest, and he picked the 17th Bomb Group. Parenthetically, we're the only people who had B-25s. He asked for volunteers, and everybody volunteered.
A careful check of the records of each crew member was made, and the 24 most experienced and competent crews were nominated.
And then we moved to Eglin. The Navy sent over a lieutenant to help us on the procedures. He'd never seen a tricycle gear airplane or a twin-engine airplane, and we'd never seen a carrier. So it was the blind leading the blind.
During intensive training at Eglin Air Force Base, the best 16 out of the original 24 were selected to go on the mission. They were therefore all volunteers, thrice picked over for selection. Of the 16 first pilots selected, Davy Jones had the highest rating as a pilot. He was a natural.
1st April, we were under the Golden Gate Bridge. The captain said, "Now hear this. We are bound for Tokyo." We had 2 cruisers and 4 destroyers with us. Worked pretty hard on the ship. On the morning of the 18th, at about daybreak, the task force was discovered by a Japanese picket boat. This time it's 7 o'clock in the morning. We had to clear the deck one way or another so that fighters could operate and protect the fleet. Either roll us overboard or we take off and fly somewhere. Word came on this loudspeaker, "Army crews man your aircraft." Crew chief ran out, topping off the tanks on the airplane, stacking in 5-gallon tins of fuel, standing around shaking. We had hoped to be within 400 miles, 650 miles at our limit. We were 800 nautical miles from Tokyo when we were discovered. It's obvious we were in deep trouble as far as having enough fuel to make destination. You couldn't make it back to Hawaii. We couldn't make it to Aleutians. There was no place to go except Japan. About an hour out, I guess, Joe Mansky, my gunner, crew chief gunner, he was 18 years old. He called up and he said, "Sir, we don't have enough gas." And I said, "That's right." Click, end of story. The anxiety was getting a little high. At one point in time, Osweiler, my co-pilot, he decided to have a sandwich. So I only had a sandwich. We took a bite. We must have chewed that thing for 5 minutes. We looked at each other and we threw it out. It was so dry, we couldn't make enough saliva. You couldn't even eat an orange. Made landfall, hit the deck, and we were lost. People were waving at us, and you'd see over farm people and so on. But we got to do something. We can't just keep doing this. We got to get rid of these bombs. So we turned south. About that time, we broke out over water and realized it was Tokyo Bay. We headed across the bay toward our target. I had a tank farm we were going pretty fast. It wasn't very good. Ahead of us was a factory. You could drop the incendiary on that. That was no problem. And there was it's a power station, and I did get a hit there. And we hit the deck. I'm up to about as fast as that airplane would go, and out over the water. And then we throttled back, and we settled out about 150 miles an hour. Navigator, taking sunline, running sunlines. He called me, he said, man, we picked up a tailwind of about 40 knots that we did not expect. By the time we hit the tip of Kyushu, he said, we got juice to make it to go all the way. And had we not had that wind, none of us would have made the coast. And they moved us to Algiers, and that's when we started then flying missions. And our target was at Bizerte, the airport, and there were 100 or more German airplanes there. Here we go charging along with our 9 airplanes. Before I got to the target, bam, I got hit, the left engine. Put the airplane down, two little knobs on the little flat space, and it took the wings off, and we just slid along on our belly. The poor guy in the nose, he went through the nose, and then we ran over him. He was laying in the back, 100 yards back. My co-pilot was out. We all got out of the airplane. We picked up a flap that had been knocked off, picked up the bombardier, put him on this, and we trekked off north toward the beach. And we hadn't walked half a mile. And here, a whole skirmish line, a whole squad of German soldiers. The corporal said, you know, the classic for you, the war is over, or come with me. So that was it. Dulag Luft was the central interrogation point. All prisoners went there first. So you're in solitary about, I don't know, I guess a week. It sort of gets to you. The interrogation started, you started out rank and number and so on, and then he told you what squadron you belonged to, when you got from the States, where you were in England, when you got to Africa. He knew everything about you, and you could either nod or not nod. And you got the cigarette bit. I was interrogated maybe, I guess, 4 times. We always told ourselves, amongst ourselves, only the Lord knows what we said. They loaded us in the car and we shipped us to Sagan, and we walked from there to the permanent camp. You get to the gate and all the old guys are standing in the gate waiting for you. So you know somebody knows you, and they say, hey, goddamn Jones, what are you doing here? As if it isn't pretty obvious what you're doing. We maintained the military hierarchy all the way through. Senior officer was Lieutenant Colonel Clark, Bub Clark, and I'm a mage, I report, yes sir. So he said, okay, I want you to move a wall, the first thing. You move a wall? Yeah, that's good. So the idea was to move the end wall, move it out a ways, so you make a space where you can hide things. That was my first job. Of course, when you first got in there was a flurry of things hiding under the honey wagon or trucking out loads of trees and all that sort of junk, and people would get caught, but nobody got out. The old Kriegies and the escape committee, they were very well organized, and they'd all been out of the wire, some of them half a dozen times. They all get caught, they bring them back, put you 2 weeks in the cooler, and turn you loose again. You couldn't just go out and escape or try to escape. You had to go to the committee. You got something novel, you could convince the committee, then the committee would back you, and they'd give you everything you needed, or within reason. If 2 people got out, they'd catch you the next morning, and they'd put you in the cooler for a week. If up to 5, no, they didn't bother you much. Over 5, the report had to go a couple echelons up. And when you got to like 20 people, it had to go clear to the top. Well, in came the Gestapo, and they would search, and they didn't know what to look for, but they were a bunch of clowns. They had a big master plan for the North Camp, which involved, of course, 3 big holes, and the scale had never been tried like that. 1, they did 3 at a time, and 2, the dimensions. They would all have to be in the neighborhood of 300 feet. Each hut, we had a stove, and it sat on some tile, and so they moved the stove, took up the tile, put the tile on a base so that you could move the whole thing at one time. And that was one trap. Another one was in the washroom, and what they did, went in and took the side out, cut that out, made a slab, and we could slide this up and down, and you could still use the water. And the other one was right straight on the floor. You just cut a goddamn hole and made it was smooth cement, made a smooth plug that tapered, that fit, and you could not see it. And they'd use soap in the groove, and you could barely get a razor blade in there. And then the security plans, and then of course the manufacturing plans, they made compasses by the dozens, and then factories for converting uniforms into other kinds of uniforms, and German uniforms, fake Lugers, fake pit rifles. You had dispersal people by the hundreds. And the tunnelers, I think we probably had 20 to 25 of us who worked underground. I consider a pretty select group, the guys who did that work. Again, they were all types, Canadians, South Africans, Australians. As we got down and got going, we realized that the sand we were getting was not the same color as the surface sand. It had more yellow in it, more clay in it. And your knees and the elbows, it's a dead giveaway. The diggers then, they ended up with a pair of long johns that you kept in the hole, and you had to put that thing on to go digging. And I'm telling you, that's the worst thing you can imagine in the world. You get ready to go down, you take that dirty, clammy, horrible-looking long john and get in that thing and button it up. It covered you everywhere. Awful till you got used to it. And then you get down and get to work and you forget it. This was sandy soil. You had to shore everything. And we used bedboards. Of course, they requisitioned these bedboards. Whether you were part of the system or not, whether you were playing or not, you gave up your bedboard. You worked on your stomach, and you couldn't turn around in the tunnel. And the other guy, your partner, he either butt to butt, or sometimes he's in the same direction, and you just get the sand between your legs, pass the sand back. Sometimes you're in Stygian darkness. Well, John, what the hell are you doing here? It get a little scary sometimes. They started building in the fall of '43 another camp, another compound, South Camp. And they announced that they're going to separate the RAF and the USAAF. The ex-committee and the command all said they need a chance. So we concentrated on one hole, and they started using the other holes to put dirt in. And so they worked like hell on that, and that's when when Tom got found. That was found by the guy tapping along, walking, just kind of tapping, and hit a hollow sound. That was quite a shock to everybody. It made everybody feel bad. They didn't know what to do with the damn thing. The dimensions were such. We were out a couple hundred feet, and they got experts in. They finally blew it up, and the blast took the damn ceiling out. It took the whole damn the end of the building out. And shortly after that is when they moved us, and we moved into a brand new little place again, and the whole routine. And it turned out, of course, that Wally Fletty and 4 or 5 other guys who were really the core, the Germans moved them like they moved all the Yankees. They moved them about 2 or 3 months because old Limlitz, the senior German non-com, he knew goddamn well these guys were the limb leaders. And so they just moved them to another camp. He thought they had taken the core, which they did, but there were enough other people. They didn't take Roger Bushell, who was the mastermind. The communication between camps was reasonable, and we knew they were still in business. But I guess when it happened, we were surprised. Very shortly thereafter, we began to realize they had already been discovered. People were coming back in a few at a time, or 1 or 2 at a time. You'd hear about that. And then you started wondering. And, we didn't get the bad news until it all kind of came at once. The Germans issued a typewritten statement. Escaping is not a game. And we all looked at that, see who we knew, and thankful to those whose names weren't on there. Had lots of good friends on it, no question about it. Some people I'd met when I first got in camp, I'd worked with, lived with, and so on. It was a pretty traumatic time, no doubt about it. There were 78 prisoners who actually escaped. 3 were made successful escapes. All of the rest of them were collected or captured by the Germans, and of that, 50 were murdered After they broke the tunnel, after the Great Escape, the aftermath of that, we didn't have any large-scale activities. After the attempt on Hitler's life in July, then everybody got mean at that point in time. In January, we knew the Russians are coming. We could hear guns at night sometimes. You could hear artillery. We're edgy. We don't know what's going to happen. And then the word came to evacuate. The Germans, everybody, we just left, walked out. Of course, everybody carried too much. You bundled up with what you could, and you carried what you could. The Germans sent a horse-drawn wagon with bread in it, and the guards, and they stumbled along with us. They couldn't do very well. And it's a foot or more of snow. We're not in really good shape, and we haven't had overstuffed with food, so our endurance is not all that great. But we walked, and the people are falling out, and I began to think about me. And there are 200 guys, my guys. Well, I didn't really get down that far, but it was every man for himself there for a while. After about 4 days, they loaded us on the boxcars. They put you in, standing room only, and they shut the doors. And that was not too good. We were in there 3 days, and we got to Munich. We all got out. You get back in formation, and we marched up to Stalag 7A, and they were starting to collect there by the thousands. The lice and the bed bug got pretty heavy in that camp. The parcel system failed. So we got kind of hungry. There's no question about it. And then they got a convoy through from Switzerland. That was a mixed blessing because so many people overate. By April, even the Germans, everybody realized that things couldn't go on a hell of a lot longer. Then on the morning of the 29th, we could hear shooting. There was some resistance in the area. Like 10 o'clock, a tank drove through our front gate. The guards had disappeared by then. Patton came in a Jeep about noon, I guess. I don't know what. And he walked through a couple of the barracks, shook hands with some people. All our people some of them were hysterical, everybody jumping up and down and swarming all over the camp. And the tank, I really was shaken. And then began, to me, one of the most difficult periods, because here's an armored spearhead go through the camp, and they keep on going. And what do? Here are several thousand of us, and the word came down, stay put, because they have to bring up service troops and transportation to evacuate you. And that was about a week, and that wasn't too good. The good part of it was I got to fly home. I got to Washington by air, and then met my wife in San Antonio. As you can imagine, it was pretty emotional and a real second honeymoon type thing. And it was pretty heavy, no question about it. I proceeded to Frederick, Oklahoma, and I got checked out of the airplane. That was a hell of an experience, too, to get back in the air and pilot an airplane after, almost 3 years. In 1947, I went out to Williams and got checked out in the P-80. The jet changed flying, there's no doubt about it. I got orders to command a bomb group. We were to be stationed in Europe in support of NATO, and we were to be equipped with tactical atomic weapons. We were there for 3 years, and it was probably the height of the Cold War, and we played for real. All things must come to an end, and I got orders home. I ended up being selected as a director of the test force. So I had half a dozen pilots and engineers. The B-58 was a fairly complicated airplane, way ahead of its time. The Skybolt was an air-launched ballistic missile, and it had a range of 1,000 miles. And I became the program director. The development in that nav system, all the good parts of that went into the space program. Pretty damn sophisticated. About that time, I got ordered to NASA. Of course, when the president brought up the Apollo program, and he made the public announcement, that did it. That pulled the trigger. Apollo 11, of course, was really it. And I was in the control center. The tension was you could see it. Watch that thing leap off the ground, that was really, really cause for celebration in the control center. It was really fantastic. Yeah.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
You still marvel that we actually did it, and there actually were people walking around that thing. And just before I retired, by golly, I was able to greet half a dozen POWs from Vietnam. I believe that I had at least an inkling of what they went through. No, not comparison at all, but I did know a little bit of the feeling of isolation and trepidation and anticipation. I can say truthfully, I started out in the cavalry, and from there into flying school, into jets, and into high-performance airplanes, and was able in my last flying experience to fly a Mach 2 airplane. That's pretty good. From horses to Mach 2. To be privileged to live in that period, pretty damn good. Pretty good.